In 1995, in a Colorado courthouse, a jury was deliberating in a murder trial in their jury room, and one of the members of the jury pulled out his Bible, the King James Version, and read to his fellow jurors the following verse from Leviticus chapter 24, verse 17. "And he that killeth any man shall surely be put to death." And not long after that, the jury voted to impose the death penalty. Then the culture war of appeals began. The defense attorney argued, that it had been improper for the juror, to read from a Bible in the jury room. The Bible was not one of the numbered volumes of the Colorado statutes. He called it an extraneous text. And he argued successfully. 10 years later, which is how long the appeal took, the Colorado Supreme Court downgraded the man's sentence to life imprisonment without parole. And that decision set off another firestorm of criticism. And I quote, "How dare that judge ban the Bible from the jury room? Doesn't he know this is America? And here in America, we are a Christian nation. Doesn't he know the Bible is the foundation of our legal system?" So the phone lines lit up on TV talk shows. This was pre-tweets and hashtags. They lit up for days. CNN and McNeil Lehrer and probably Larry King had a heyday. But what seemed to go unnoticed is that from a Christian point of view, the juror completely misused the Bible. He read from Leviticus, saying a murderer must be put to death. Make the punishment fit the crime. What he failed to do was share what Jesus has to say about this message. Jesus, in our reading today, explicitly denies it. He admits that that's what the law says in Leviticus, citing Leviticus 24, verse 20. But then he tells his own disciples not to follow it. It's one of only a very few examples of Jesus overturning a law from the Hebrew Scriptures. Completely overturned it. He teaches this: do not resist evildoers. If someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn and offer your left. If someone steals the coat off your back, then offer them your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to carry a burden for a mile, when you've reached that first milestone, then keep on walking for a second mile. That last comment about walking the second mile would have really touched a nerve in Jesus' listeners. The Roman soldiers of that time were used to calling Jewish men out of a crowd and saying, "Here, Jew boy, put on this backpack and walk behind me for a mile. You're going to be my mule today." It was shameful. It was humiliating. But it was common enough in those days of military occupation so that the most crude and cruel Roman soldier from some distant province could do that to the most distinguished rabbi in that community. The Jews hated that sort of thing. So Jesus' teaching is shocking and surprising. It was shocking and surprising in the first century, and it is still shocking and surprising to us today. To some of Jesus' listeners, it certainly must have seemed like he was a little bit off his nut. But there is a certain ingenious psychology at work here. If you put on that Roman backpack and then walk for a mile, grumbling all the way, and then dropping it right at that first mile marker, then the Roman soldier has succeeded in making you his inferior, in making you his beast of burden. He doesn't mind if you complain, that's half the fun. But if you don't stop after the first mile, but go on for the second, And if you do it with a mysterious little smile on your face, not a grimace, then you're going to have that soldier so totally confused he won't understand what's going on. The whole structure of the world as he sees it, the structure that puts him higher than you in the imperial pecking order, no longer applies. You have stepped right out of that pecking order. Some think choosing that second mile is really just an act of abject servitude. But it's not. It's something completely different. It's a declaration of dependence on God. Jesus is bringing in an entirely new ethic. The old one no longer applies. That old ethic is called an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And as most of us know, it has a distinguished history. Until Jesus showed up, just about every human culture has had something like it. And the oldest documented occurrence is in the ancient Babylonian Code of Hammurabi. What it means is if someone gouges out your eye, you are, or your kinsman, is entitled to track the perpetrator down and take out his eye in revenge. If someone punches you in the jaw, knocking your tooth out, then you're entitled to haul off and hit him as many times as it takes until one of his teeth goes flying. In some cultures, this business of officially sanctioned vengeance is so deeply ingrained that blood feuds can go on for generations. Sometimes the combatants even forget why they're fighting. Each act of retribution is set off by the one immediately preceding, and getting revenge for that most recent slight is all that matters. What not many people, though, who love to quote the Code of Hammurabi realize is that Hammurabi didn't draft it in order to give vengeance free rein. He wrote it to set limits. There was no question, his was a brutal empire, and he was a brutal ruler. Everyone knew that retribution, going after the eye of someone who had plucked yours out, was simply the way the world worked. Nobody questioned it. An unprovoked act of violence kicked the world out of balance, and only an equal and opposite reaction would restore balance and harmony. Hammurabi knew one eye had to go. What he was really trying to do was protect the other eye. In a society where retributive justice is the controlling legal principle, the greatest damage to a society's equilibrium comes not from vengeance, but from vengeance that goes too far. Because the world is then just as much out of balance, but in the opposite direction. What an eye for an eye really means is you've got to stop at just one eye. There's a scene from Richard Attenborough's film Gandhi in which the great leader of India is at stake in our country now. How about when we're driving? Someone passes us in a dangerous way and then immediately slips into the lane, our lane, right in front of us and slows down. Doesn't that drive you nuts? Doesn't that make you want to just swing the wheel to the left again and speed up and pass that miserable offender and pull right in front of her or him and slow down yourself? Maybe. In my commutes to New Haven over the years, going to seminary, there were many times when I had to spend a little bit more time once arrived to calm down and sit in worship and ask for atonement. I had to drive on Highway 84, Highway 8, Highway 691, Highway 91, drive through Waterbury. Many times it brought out the worst in me. But the urge to vengeance is almost universal. We all feel its insistent tug. We hear its seductive whisper, "Are you going to let that person get away with it?" problem is, it's so easy to mix up justice and vengeance in our minds. For all practical purposes, we tend to conflate them. We tend to treat them as one and the same, and they're not. The problem with casually accepting vengeance as simply the way of the world is that the effects of vengeance are not limited just to the person it's directed against. It affects the person seeking vengeance as well. One of my beloved go-to writers and preachers is Frederick Buechner, who in his time, especially as the school minister at Phillips Exeter, wrote several novels and collections of essays. And one of my favorites is called Wishful Thinking. And he writes in it, of the 7 deadly sins, anger is probably the most fun. To lick your wounds, to smack your lips over grievances long past, to roll your tongue over the prospect of bitter confrontations still to come, to savor to the last toothsome morsel both the pain you are given and the pain you are giving back. In many ways, it is a feast fit for a king. The chief drawback is that what you are wolfing down is yourself. The skeleton at the feast is you. Confucius says much the same thing in a little saying that could fit inside of a fortune cookie. If you devote your life to seeking revenge, dig 2 graves. Jesus knows this as he says this to his disciples, turn the other cheek. He wants to save us from that damage. He wants to show us another way, a difficult way to be sure, but the only way that truly leads to freedom. We know that Jesus came for far more than just to confirm some wisdom already expressed in other cultures. But as he does that here, he also adds his unique examples of how that might actually play out for his followers, including you and me, turning the other cheek, going the 2nd mile, giving our coat and our cloak, not refusing a borrower, and so on. In so doing, he shows that this principle should be applied to the unique circumstances of our lives as we follow him. What are these circumstances? And how will we follow him? Amen.